Hey there, you're watching the Data Dispatch. Thank you for tuning in. Happy New Year. I hope everyone had a fantastic holiday season. It's been a while since I posted a video. After I got back from Bonaire, I wound up with salmonella. That knocked me out for a few weeks. We've been traveling a bunch, and relevant to this channel, we went car camping a couple of times in December. And that's what I want to talk about today. A cold weather car camping sleeping tip that I used for the first time in December and absolutely loved. We went camping twice in December, and one time we went, it was perfect. It was unseasonably warm. I was wearing short sleeve shirts. I think I even had on shorts part of the day. It was great. But the other time we went, it was very, very cold, at least for around here. The highs never got out of the 40s, and the lows were sub-freezing, 28, 29 degrees. Now, I'm perfectly prepared for myself to sleep in those kinds of conditions, and I can even take one, or if I'm willing to be a little bit chilly, both of my daughters. I have enough sleeping bags for 3 of us to sleep like that. But of course, this was the first time that my wife had ever agreed to go on, and I wanted her to come back, so I needed it to be very, very comfortable. And on top of that, one of my friends who was going to come with us had to cancel at the last minute, and we agreed to take his daughter. So while I have enough down to sleep at 28 degrees for 3 people, I don't for 5. So what was I going to do? Obviously, I could just buy more down. And normally that would be my recommendation, just to buy the right sleeping bag and the right sleeping mats for the conditions you're going to be sleeping in. But that was going to be a pretty hefty chunk of change for something that's going to get used 1, 2, or 3 times in this particular instance. And I'm not a big tent heater fan. I know that there are ones out now that measure CO2 and all that. I've done my research. But I've just heard too many horror stories and in fact have firsthand experience with a horror story. And so I just refuse to use one. No shots at anybody who does, but tent heaters just aren't for me. So what to do? Enter the electric blanket. Now, this is a tip that I had seen online several times and I just kind of discarded. I figured that the heat would dissipate too much to be useful at all, and introducing a fire risk or shock risk into the tent didn't really seem like a great idea for me. But after I did a ton of research, I decided that with a new electric blanket and proper use, that the risk of fire or shock was extraordinarily low. And boy, was I wrong about how much the heat would dissipate. Let me show you how I was running this. All right, here we go. So first off, I covered my sleeping mat with a blanket. Not just a sheet, but a heavy sort of type throw. I didn't want the heat from the electric blanket to melt the plastic on the sleeping mat. I didn't know if it would get that hot, but I didn't want to find out. Then I slept with the electric blanket underneath me, not on top. I figured, number one, that reduced the risk of the electric blanket getting sort of bunched up in my sleeping bag. That's a particular kind of fire risk you read about online. And also, I thought that it wouldn't just let the heat dissipate out into the air. This both warmed the foam underneath me, and then my sleeping bag trapped the heat coming up on top of me. And then ultimately, I wound up covering this whole thing with a fitted sheet. I don't know if that was necessary, but I just didn't like the skin feel of the electric blanket. And that's it. Voila! We were sleeping in 28-degree weather, and I was in nothing but my base layers in a 30-degree quilt, and I was overly hot. And this thing I only started off with the electric blanket on medium, wound up having to turn it to low because I got so warm, and then ultimately even wound up shedding my top just because I was so warm. And that was in 28-degree weather in a bag that I'd have normally been really cold in without a jacket or something else on top. So obviously you need power to run this. In Texas State Parks, that's usually pretty easy to come by, or you can grab yourself something like this, and it works really well, but we'll talk about that later. So this may not be something that you Western public land campers can deploy, but for me, in my typical situation, it is something that I will definitely use again if the conditions are right. Now look, if I've got to run an extension cord and it's raining, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to use this in a world in which I think I'm just going to have to run it on high all night long. I don't want to do that. But honestly, even just turning it on for a couple of hours before you get in your sleeping bag and having a hot mat, and a sort of a pre-warmed sleeping bag made a huge difference. It was incredible. That's usually the worst part of the evening, when it's 35 degrees and you're shedding down to your base layers and jumping in to a cold sleeping bag and trying to resist the temptation to put on, a jacket and that sort of thing. You're going to eventually get warm. This completely took care of that. It was so much more pleasant. It was great. So next time you're going to be out and it's going to be cold or a little bit colder than you think your bag can handle, I encourage you to try the electric blanket and let me know what you think. Or if you think this is a terrible idea, and if you can keep it remotely civil, let me know in the comments below, and I'd love to talk about it. So that's it. Subscribe if you haven't. Maybe check out another video on the channel. But until next time, go have some fun outside. See you soon.